Okay, a pleasant day, everyone. This topic is all about the FLA, SLA process, or the first language acquisition and the second language acquisition process. So we have here the five stages of second learning acquisition: the pre-production or the silent period, early production, speech emergence, intermediate fluency, and advanced fluency. So when we're talking about the pre-production or the silent period, so basically, this is the time in which there is no production of language yet. But this does not mean that students are not learning. It may be that they are not just ready to speak. So, pre production here, there is no language production yet. So, next is the early production. So, when we talk about early production, so at this stage, students can usually speak in one or two word phrases. They can use short language chunks that have been memorized, although these chunks may not always be used correctly. So, number three is speech emergence. So, students have developed a vocabulary of about 3,000 words, as indicated there in the PowerPoint, and they can communicate with simple phrases and sentences. So at this stage, they will ask simple questions that may or may not be grammatically correct. So we have here the intermediate fluency. So this is where the English language learners try to master the complexity of the language grammar and structure. So students in this stage will also be able to understand the more complex concepts. So that's it. So number five is advanced fluency. So this is the stage where a student achieves the so-called cognitive academic language proficiency in a second language. So those are the five stages of second language acquisition. Next, we have here the four stages of culture shock. So this is before they became comfortable with their new language. So these four stages include euphoric or honeymoon stage, rejection stage, regression stage, and integration stage. So when we talk about euphoric or honeymoon stage, so this is characterized by a euphoric feeling of fascination. So learners tend to have this feeling of excitement. So that's it. So rejection stage, um, at this stage, learners tend to reject their new surroundings because there is so much that they do not understand. So they tend to reject. Number three, we have here the regression stage. So basically, from the word itself, regression, which means moving backwards. So in this phase of culture shock, a learner will just speak his or her own language. So next is the integration stage. So this is the last stage. So if a learner overcome those prior stages, a learner can now feel the comfort. He can now realize that cultures and languages differs from one place to another. So those are the four stages of culture shock. So now we're going to have this summary of our topic, the first language acquisition and the second language acquisition process. So this is just a run through of everything that has been discussed by my group mates prior this video. So we have here the silent period, rejection period, and the language transfer. So when we're talking about the silent period, so there is no production of language yet. Then when we're talking about the rejection period, students may refuse to learn the new language because students are still attached to their first language and they find it as odd and uninteresting to study. And then we have here the language transfer. This is when a learner apply his or her prior knowledge about his or her first language to the language he or she is currently studying. Then the language transfer has positive and negative. So when we're talking about the positive language transfer, so this is the use of a feature of the first language that is similar to the second language. So that's it. While negative language transfer is applying the first language to the second language that is completely different. So this is more likely to create misunderstandings or grammatical errors. We have also here the conscious and unconscious language transfer. So when we say conscious, learners are unskilled translators that are only guessing when producing a speech in a second language. While unconscious language transfer, learners may not realize that the structures and internal rules of the language is in questions are different. So that's it. So we have here the creative construction and interlanguage. So when we say creative construction, implied here that the development of acquisition of certain language begins with the exposure to input, whether through reading or listening. So a language acquisition is innately determined and that we are born with a certain system of language. Then when we say interlanguage, this is a gradual process from first language to the second language with set of rules and grammars. And then next we have here the stages of interlanguage development. We have here the random errors, emergent stage, systematic stage, and the stabilization stage. So random errors here is the learners here in random errors got a little idea about the system of language. And in emergent stage, a learner began to identify a system and internalize the rules. However, they'll be somehow forgotten. In systematic stage, there are more mistakes than actual errors, while in stabilization stage, there are very few errors. So next we have here the 5 cognitive processes involved in interlanguage. So we have here the language transfer, transfer of training, learning strategies, communicative strategies, and generalization of the second language material. So language transfer, as discussed prior or earlier, it is in which features of the first language are projected on the second language, while transfer of training in which teaching of a language creates rules which are not part of the second language. Learning strategies, each human is given unique learning strategy. So this means through which the learners acquire the second language. So basically, this is the means on how a learner use a certain learning strategy. So next we have here the communicative strategies. So this is the ways in which the learner tries to communicate in the second language. So there is a communication. Next is the overgeneralization of the second language material. So this means that the rules of the second language are applied too widely. So next we have here the facilization. So this facilization occurs when interlanguage when the transition between the first language and second language is freeze because of inability to overcome the obstacles. And then we have here the classification of facilization. You have the individual facilization and group facilization, temporary facilization, and permanent facilization. So, individual and group facilization, where error, reappearance, and language competence facilization occurs. And temporary and permanent facilization, when we say temporary, it only inhibit for shorter or longer periods. So there is a time duration. And then when we say permanent facilization takes place as a result of social and psychological variables, it is already registered in the mind. And then we have here the types of facilization: the phonological facilization, morphological facilization, syntactic facilization, semantic facilization, and pragmatic facilization. So when we say phonological facilization, um, the difference of phonology is possibly the greatest difference between languages. So this facilization refers to the repetition of phonological errors that result from incorrect pronunciation of second language. Like, let's say, there are certain pronunciation which do not exist in other language. So when we say again, next is a morphological facilization, this refers to the grammatical morphemes of words. Then syntactic facilization, this is a facilization of the arrangement of words and phrases, since different languages have own syntactic rules. Next is the semantic facilization. This is concerned of word meanings facilization, the use of language forms that exist in the second language but does not represent the meanings in the other language. Lastly, we have the pragmatic facilization. So this is the inability to understand what is meant by what is said. So this occurs in the cross-cultural communication. So we have here the causal factors of facilization: language transfer, training transfer, learning strategy, communication strategy, and overgeneralization. So we have also here facilization reduction, adaptation of proper learning strategies, reduction of negative transfer of first language, and number three is exposure to the true language and true language culture. And then that's it. We are the group. Thank you.